I am a 19 years old female. I have an estranged grandpa more or less. He's my dad's father, but my dad hardly had a relationship with him. I have 2 other siblings, one younger and one older. My grandma divorced my grandpa when my dad was only 10. So he lived with my grandma his whole life in a different state and didn't see him. When he got older, he saw him a little more, and my grandpa started coming around a little bit more as well. He'd stay for a week at a time and then go home. He was an old, bitter man, to be honest. He never got remarried and lived his whole life in his coastal town with the same friends he'd had his whole life. He wasn't pleasant to be around and could hold grudges longer than anyone I've ever met. But regardless of this, he was filthy rich. He owned a successful business that he sold for $1 million. He retired after selling, but his house sits on an island as well as the biggest piece of land on the island. So it sold for well over $3 million. I was never close with my grandpa, but I took after his sister who is in right now, and he adores her. He always told me that he was proud to see me follow in her footsteps. He died a few months ago. Since then, my family has been torn apart. He left everything to me. He essentially liquidated all of his assets, and it ended up being close to $8 million. I was shocked. I didn't and still don't know what to do with the money, but I'm going to save it. My dad and stepmom as well as my siblings are hounding me to split the money with them. I just can't do it. My dad is an alcoholic who never said anything nice about his dad. Despite him being bitter, my grandpa actually bought my dad a $300,000 house. My dad would 100% drink away any money given to him. As far as my siblings, my brother has full financial support from my grandma as he is the favorite, and he's very wasteful and ungrateful. He never talks to me and always is very mean to me when he does. My little sister is the only person I've actually considered. She's very young, and that's really the only thing stopping me. Her mom is money-oriented and would take the money from her. So I'm waiting until she turns 18, and I offered to pay for her college. But now my family is telling me I'm unfair and the money doesn't belong to me and I'm not deserving of it. That I'm too young and I'll waste it on cars and clothes. I don't agree, and now they're all threatening to cut me off and never speak to me. Or even sue me if I don't give them all a chunk of the money. I don't know what to do, and I'm buckling under pressure here. I've already had 2 police officers out to my house because my dad is claiming I stole the money from him. Everything was through an attorney. I know I did nothing wrong legally, but morally? 6 years ago, my son Matthew had a daughter with his now ex-wife Josie. I have always thought of Josie as my own daughter, so when they divorced 7 years ago due to my son cheating, I was conflicted and disappointed. Josie wasn't particularly close with any of her family, so my husband and I naturally took them in. Josie was an angel. She had insisted that we didn't have to lift a finger more than before we had taken them in, and though she was hurt, she kept civil around Matthew. My husband and I held a huge hand in raising their daughter Ruth. Because Matthew remarried less than a year later and now has a 4-year-old son after disowning Ruth. 2 years ago my husband was diagnosed with lung cancer. It was hard on everyone, especially Ruth. They were extremely close. She told him about her girlfriends and boyfriends before anyone else and has always wanted him to be the one to walk her down the aisle. At her wedding, Matt rarely ever visited and didn't answer our calls, often saying that we had other kids, so it wasn't like my husband was dying lonely. Last night Matt stopped by to talk about inheritance. He never mentioned Josie nor Ruth and hinted that he thought he should get more inheritance than his siblings the entire time. My husband and I shared awkward looks until he decided to cut in. He explained that everyone would get a piece, but he'd focus more on Ruth and Bonnie, one of our other grandkids. Matt got angry and said that Ruth was just a bastard and that his son deserved more than her. My husband got furious after that and left the room saying that he wouldn't include Matthew at all. Matt yelled back and turned to me saying that Ruth wasn't worth it because she'd just grow up to be a whore like her mother. I told him that I'd rather have her mother as my daughter than him as my son and insisted that he leave. I'm getting phone calls from Matt's wife and family friends saying that my husband and I overreacted, and he was just angry that we were playing favorites. To clear some things up, Josie did not cheat on Matthew. Josie and Matthew met later in college and Josie was known as a party girl. Before that, Ruth isn't the product of an affair, but we are planning on getting a DNA test because what Matthew said has gotten under Ruth's skin. She was at the house when this occurred and overheard it. When it came to taking in Josie and Ruth, we didn't hesitate because Josie is not from here. She and Matt lived in another country until he moved them here a few months before he got caught cheating, and they had nowhere else to go as Josie was a stay-at-home mom. I had no intentions of choosing Josie over Matt, then and now, and I never discouraged Matt from visiting. I tried to make it very clear that we weren't picking and choosing when we took Josie in. We just wanted her and our granddaughter to be safe and have a good home. I am a 35-year-old female, a musician, playing gigs and at an orchestra as a violinist. Rehearsals just resumed, so orchestra is my main source of income ATM. My sister, she's 26, is a social worker, working 3 days a week, so minimal income, but she adores her job. I live in a small 2-bedroom apartment, both rooms around 9-10 square meters. Using the second room as a practice room / storage for my instruments, 3 violins, 2 guitars, a digital piano, a small drum kit, and other stuff. 4 months ago my sister broke up with her BF and I offered her my spare room, temporarily. I moved most of my stuff to the living room so I could fit a small bed in there. Sis moved in, but she asked me to move more stuff to the living room. I moved pretty much everything sans the piano, to the point where the living room became uninhabitable. Then she started complaining about my violin playing, saying it gave her headaches. I told her I couldn't stop the daily practice without risking my only steady income. The arguments got worse. She told me to play only when she wasn't home, but with her work schedule I couldn't afford that. I tried switching to the electric violin, but even that can be pretty loud, so it didn't help. Several times I reminded her this was only a temporary arrangement, but she didn't seem to hear me. 2 weeks ago I arrived home to finding my piano in the bathroom, near water and humidity, because my sis needed the space for her new double bed. When I told her she can't SRSLY expect me to store my piano there, she said, "Yeah, you will just have to sell it, I guess." I got so mad I told her she has 7 days to leave, but she didn't take me seriously. For a week I only talked to her to remind her how much time she has left, but she always laughed it off, told me to stop acting like a crazy person. When the deadline came I boxed up all her stuff while she was at work, booked an Airbnb bedsit close by and drove her stuff there. She was livid but couldn't do anything but take her new keys and stay there. The following week she kept calling me with an increasingly apologetic tone, saying she shouldn't have moved my piano or bought a bed. She promised she would put more effort into finding a new place. And by the end of the week I considered most of our issues at least addressed, so I drove to help her move back. But when I was carrying the first box down, she went, "I do hope you will at least stop with the violin this time." I absolutely refused to take more of that F******ing violin. I dropped the box, wished her good luck and left. Now, 2 days later, on one hand it feels like a huge overreaction to leave my own sister literally homeless because of an argument about the violin. I know she cannot afford to stay there, but on the other hand I have no plans to allow her back here, because I feel she would just continue crossing boundaries and never leave. About a week after my post I planted a wall of blackberries and raspberries at the 2 sides of my garden facing the driveway, about 30 centimeters from the edge, so no overhanging branches. On the other side of the berry wall I planted lots stuff like strawberries and tomatoes. To reach the tomatoes and strawberries from the driveway you have either go through the fruit bushes or walk up to my house. Walk about 2 m along the side of the house and my windows and then walk into my actual garden. Not something you do by mistake. For about 2 weeks it was somewhat quiet, but I still found the kids on my driveway every single days. As far as I know they did not enter the garden and I hadn't noticed them walking around my house anymore. So I figured the bushes were working. About 1 week ago berry season started and my bushes are now full of raspberries and there's lots of strawberries as well. The neighbors noticed. First I caught the boys picking and eating raspberries, so I told them off and dropped them off at home, told their mom I caught them stealing. That's how I see it, even though it's fruit, and that I'd call the cops next time. She huffed and told me to grow up, but took the boys inside anyway. After that it was quiet up until yesterday afternoon, when I went out for a while and found the dad and his 2 sons right in the middle of my garden when I returned. clearing my bushes and plants. I didn't even confront them. Just called the cops from a distance as they hadn't noticed me yet and started filming them after making the call. Luckily 2 cops showed up after 10 minutes or so and they confronted the neighbor as they were still picking berries. They told them they were trespassing and that the berry picking was in fact considered stealing and that I could press charges. For the first time I noticed a bit of fear in my neighbor. He was having trouble finding his words and kept looking back at his house. I guess hoping his wife would show to yell at the cops. They all went inside with the cops, so I just went home as well. After a while the cops came by and asked me if I wanted to press charges. I asked them if they felt like they scared the neighbor enough to stay away. I got a small smile and yes, about him, but the wife had just kept shouting at them and her husband about the little. Living next door. I told them no for now, asked them if I'd be allowed to get an extra camera set up on the wall between my garden and the road, to cover the entire front garden plus driveway. They said that's allowed as long as it's on my side of the wall. So, now I'm getting an extra camera installed. One neighbor knows I'm done messing around but his wife isn't there yet, and if I ever catch any of them again, the cops will be called and possible charges will follow.